Welcome. We are here at the Sivananda Ashram Yoga Retreat on Paradise Island, Bahamas. My name is Molly Birkholm, and I'm here with Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo. Today we're going to be asking her some questions and also having a discussion around some of the things that she's experienced in her life, as well as her studies and all of her life's work. So thank you so much for joining us, Jetsunma.
Yeah, thank you, Molly.
I want to start off on a very human level. When I'm in your presence, I really feel the quality of your attention, your clarity, and your presence. It feels like in this world where we have so many distractions that we're losing that quality of really being with another human, being with what our work is, being with an animal, being with the food we're eating. Could you share some suggestions for how we can be more present in our lives?
Well, obviously, as you know very well, nowadays the big buzzword in spiritual and psychological circles is mindfulness. And mindfulness basically means paying attention to what we're doing and what we're thinking and feeling at the time when we are thinking and feeling it, so that because from our thoughts issues our speech and our actions, and so therefore it's very important to be conscious of what's going on in the mind, because that influences everything we do. And so nowadays, because our minds are so distracted, and our modern way of living is always pulling us outwards in many, many directions at the same time. So therefore, there has been this counter movement of recognizing that the mind just ends up being completely stressed out and frantic, really. And that the way backwards is to come back into the moment. So nowadays, I mean, that's become even in big businesses nowadays, they're teaching mindfulness in schools, in prisons, in the military, and hospitals, and so forth. Now they're recognizing that we have to become the masters of our mind instead of slaves of our mind. So this is a good thing.
Thank you. As spiritual seekers, we learn that our attachments and our aversions are the sources of our suffering. What can we do to address our desires and to start rooting out our desires so that we can find our freedom from this?
Well, first of all, I think that we have to be aware of it. Because, again, back to mindfulness, if we're not aware of these afflictive emotions as they arise, by the time we are aware, we're way down the road.
Sure.
And it's very difficult then to say, whoa, the horses are galloping. So obviously the answer to that is to become more conscious of our responses, especially to external stimuli like what we see and hear and taste and touch, and our internal response, what we think and feel. If we can be more conscious at the time of arising, watching that something which gives us pleasure, we feel desire towards and reach out and want to grasp, and something which gives us displeasure, then we feel aversion and annoyance and irritation. If we can manage to be conscious of that, the sooner the better, then we can be in control. In the meantime, it's also very good for people in this world to start cultivating more contentment, being satisfied and appreciating what we have, because we have so much. And normally we're not appreciative of what we have because we're always looking at something more. And so rather than that, to just sit down and just think, we are already so wealthy, inwardly, outwardly, and to appreciate that and feel content. Isn't it wonderful how much I already have? Do I really need more?
It feels like, in when I study in spirituality, I see that my attachments and my desires are the root of my suffering. At the same time, when I'm with my son or with my family or doing something I love a lot, it feels like a desire that I really want to have, that I don't even want to let go of. And I'm curious what you would say to that. How do we hold that?
Well, I mean, the point is that, of course, as the Buddha and other great spiritual beings have said, the root of our suffering is our attachment. But that doesn't mean we don't love. I mean, love is a very important quality, If we lived in this world with no love, then we're dead inwardly. I mean, love and compassion and the joy in being with others and so forth is extremely important. That's not what's going to bring the suffering. That brings joy. When one was with people one loves and everything, you're enjoying doing things together and you feel this inner happiness and joy of being with them, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. The difficulty comes when we then want to grasp at that and not let it go, not allow things to flow, so that the pain comes because of our hope and fear. Our hope that this is going to last forever, which is unrealistic, and our fear and grief at loss. And so that's what causes the problem. It's this grasping part of the mind, not the open-hearted, loving part of the mind. That's a good thing. But we have a hard time separating the two.
What do you feel are the most important ways that we can expand our capacity to love in this life?
And that's what I'm going to be talking about. There are one way which we can do it very practically is to recognize that all beings we meet, not just human beings, but animals, insects, all beings, want to be happy and they don't want to suffer. It's really shared with every being. All beings want to have well-being within themselves. They don't want to, who wants to suffer? And so to recognize that in every single person that we meet, every animal we meet, to recognize that just as we wish to be well and not to be unhappy, all beings want to be well and not unhappy. And so the very least we can do is to open our heart to wish that for them. Maybe we can't do it for them, we can't give them what they want, but at least from our side, we wish them well. And then that gives us also an inner connection with everybody we meet.
So when we're in the midst of love and living this life, oftentimes things happen, things that are very hurtful and things that need forgiveness. How can we learn to forgive and also learn to cultivate trust again after something that has compromised our trust has occurred?
Well, nowadays, this has become a very hot subject because more and more it's been revealed that authority figures that we trusted turned out not to be trustworthy in religious circles as well as in other fields where there is authority and power, how it gets misused. And often women are the ones who end up being the victims of this mentality. I think that, first of all, that one, in order to forgive, one doesn't need to condone. Just because, if somebody does something which was not the right thing to be done and has caused harm and deep hurt, one has to accept that is what happened, and it should not have happened, and that, you know, it's not that we are saying that it's all light and love, because it isn't. But at the same time, we should recognize that if we hold to our resentment and our hurt and our trauma, and we build our personality around that, then we are harming ourselves in a way far worse than the original hurt. It's like if we have a wound and then we keep scratching it and even putting acid on it, it's never going to heal. And it only harms ourselves, it doesn't harm the other. So I think that we have to recognize that when people do things which have caused a lot of harm and have really hurt ourselves or others that we love, then we should accept the fact that that's what they did, and it was a wrong thing to have done, and that's a very sad thing to have done, but it's in the past now, and that one has to appreciate that anyone who acts like that is a very sad being, you know, that the one can develop at least compassion for that person, that, you know, imagine that they would do such a thing like that. It's just not, you know, it's very sad that they are capable of doing that sort of thing. And then at the same time to, if, for example, it was someone in authority, like a teacher or someone like that, to appreciate the good that they have done. You know, that a lot of people, when, you know, they get into very abusive relationships with a teacher, then they abandon everything. But in fact, maybe they learned a lot from the teacher. Maybe the teacher did lots of good things. This was only one shadow area. There also was light. That's why we trusted. And so, you know, that I think to recognize the fact that, you know, even if we have been hurt at some point, we don't have to therefore be mistrustful for the rest of our life, but we should be careful. We also should, sometimes we are very naive, you know, and this is also not a good thing. We should have some wisdom in our relationships. But forgiveness is dependent on compassion, that we recognize it was a very sad thing, but, you know, well, we all learned something from that, and we can be grateful for what we learned, and not to hold the hurt in our heart, but to allow it to just increase our understanding without making us bitter and sour, which doesn't help anybody.
It's so interesting because now, with everything going on in the world, it feels like there's this judgment and this anger that arises. Well, I'll just speak for myself, inside of me at the degradation of human rights just occurring so openly, and also of the degradation of the environment, and so many things that are just being done in the open. And this feeling comes up, and it personally, I feel like I don't want to harbor that. I want to remain active and engaged in creating meaningful change. And at the same time, I have to honor that the world circumstances now are bringing up that feeling of judgment and anger over what's happening. So how can we hold that judgment and that anger and honor the role it's serving, and in some way maybe use it to empower us to create change? Do you have any suggestions for that? It feels really important in this moment to find a way to deal with everything that's coming up.
Well, in Buddhism, there is the Bodhisattva Tara. She is the divine feminine, and she represents fearless compassion. She's a very strong lady, and she has 21 aspects, most of which are sort of peaceful and smiling, but some are very wrathful. She can be very fierce. She doesn't stand for nonsense. But the energy is not anger, but deep compassion. because she recognizes that when people do things which, like human rights or degradation of the ecology, it's based on all these negative emotions of our greed and our ignorance and our aggression, which are harmful not only to the people who perpetrate it, but to outside too. So then the response is not anger, which just creates more anger and it becomes like a cycle, but deep, wise compassion, which is very powerful and cuts through everything because it's fearless, like a mother defending a child, right? A mother defends the child with her own life, fearlessly. I mean, we had a little dog in our nunnery, and it was a very small little dog, and she had puppies, and when the puppies were small, she would defend her puppies even against the big dogs who came along to have a look and see what was going on, and the humans. And normally she was a very cuddly dog. She liked being, made a fuss of. But during that period, she was absolutely fearless in defending her little ones because she's like a mother, and her great love and compassion for her, the vulnerability of her babies made her completely, she would stand up to anybody. But it wasn't anger. It was her love for her little ones. So this is what makes us very powerful. As soon as we get angry, we lose our power. And we plug into that same energy that is what we're complaining about in the first place.
Exactly.
Right?
So true.
I mean, this is why sometimes I point out this story in one of the Star Wars, where Luke Skywalker is facing the Dark Emperor, and he's screaming at the Dark Emperor, who's saying, join our side because you're going to lose. So you might as well come on to our side. Your father's already on our side, so, come on, get real. And so Luke is screaming at the Dark Emperor and saying he will never go on to his side and he will fight to the very end. And he's getting very worked up. And the evil emperor is just smiling and saying, yes, come on, get more angry, get more mad at me. Because as long as you are angry with me, you are on our side. And that was very wise. I mean, of course, after that they were all fighting. But that moment of recognizing that if we are angry with evil, we are on the side of evil. We are giving them energy because it's based on negative emotions. And whatever we are angry about, nonetheless, that anger is still a negative emotion. Because people who are into all these causes, they get so angry, and there's always something to be angry about. If you lose that cause, you can find another one. And it becomes like an energy source, but it's a negative energy source. And if I'm in conflict with you because I'm right and you're wrong, then automatically we are creating conflict, right? And so the other side who thinks they're right and we're wrong, and then clash. And so nothing gets resolved because neither side is listening to the other side. And we are just creating conflict, which is, what we're supposed to be helping to overcome. But we're just making more conflict. So there has to be another way of approaching it from a different, powerful energy source, which is not based on negativity, but which is based on love and compassion, which is extraordinarily powerful. I mean, we have to believe that love conquers all, eventually. So, I mean, I think that's the point, that to really look at what is fueling our sense of outrage, whether it's coming from a positive root, from the very, because after all, compassion is the nature of who we really are. So therefore, it's a source, if we can access it, which is infinite and powerful, because it's our true nature. Whereas anger is just a negative emotion which can be transformed and overcome. So why not go to a deeper source?
Absolutely. In this, when we're finding that place where we want to overcome, where we feel called inside of ourselves, that we see something and we say, I can't sit anymore, I have to take action. You've done this many times in your life where you felt called and you listened to that call, that sense of something needing to come forth. What advice do you have for people, and maybe you can share from your experience, what advice do you have for people of looking for that dharma or that unique call of duty in life, to find that and then to take action in a way that can really make a change?
Well, I mean, frankly, I think it doesn't hurt just to sit quietly.
This thing called meditation, it might work.
Because it helps us to begin to really look into the mind and understand the mind, and to slowly tame the mind so that we are able to really make use of a tool. I mean, our mind is a tool which can be like any tool. It can be very useful, or we can, like a screwdriver. I mean, you can use it to open screws, or you can use it to hit somebody or skewer them. I mean, the tool itself is just neutral. And what we do with it is what counts. So as long as our minds are really, mad monkey minds, anything which we do will only be relatively effective at the best. And so to really begin to learn how to understand the mind and how to transform the mind, our negativities, into something more positive, and then to take that and go out, makes a lot of sense. Because otherwise, as people come together with the very best motivations, but they can't even get along with themselves. What about transforming the world?
Sure.
They don't get even on with inwardly with themselves, and outwardly with others, and then outwardly with everything. I mean, what can you say? It's not something which, even with the best motivation, if it comes from a negative source somehow, so that we want to fix the world because it's easier fixing the world than fixing ourselves.
So true.
Then it creates problems. So having a balance between the two, you breathe in and then you breathe out. You breathe in, you breathe out, you breathe in, you breathe out. If you're always breathing out and never breathing in, then you're going to end up completely breathless. And likewise, always breathing in and never taking an outer breath is also unbalanced. So, it makes sense.
What do we do when we encounter fear and our deepest fears? You have, in your life, encountered so many times things that would debilitate most people, that would never be able to, and you again and again have risen to the call. Where does that come from, and what can you share with us that can empower us to do the same?
I mean, I think everybody looking at it from the outside thinks, oh, how difficult. But when you're in it, I wasn't thinking it was very difficult. I mean, looking back a little bit, I'm surprised at how I wasn't more afraid at certain times than I was. But I wasn't, so I can't take any credit. I mean, it just didn't occur to me at the time that I was supposed to be afraid of that. But for people in general, fear is a very often present emotion. And also when people meditate, of course. Because once the surface mind begins to quieten down, then all sorts of things come up. And people imagine that when you meditate, you end up with, bliss and joy, but actually many people end up with a lot of suppressed thoughts and feelings coming up. Once the mind gets more quiet, then, it's like here we have the ocean, and mostly we're living on the surface of the ocean on the waves. You're riding up and down on the waves. Once you go down into the ocean, then there's all sorts of things down there, not just nice little, friendly dolphins, but also sharks and all sorts of very strange beings living in the depths of the ocean. And so likewise, one of the most common is that people experience deep fears, which normally they try to suppress in their busy daily lives. When you're sitting quietly, then this kind of very, either fear coming from some past trauma, or a fear which is a kind of existential fear. So I think the one of the important points of meditation is to allow all these suppressed feelings, both pleasant ones and unpleasant ones, to come to the surface, and to recognize them, and in a way to befriend them. Not to be fearful of fear, but to allow the fear to come up, and then say, "Hello, fear. What's your problem? What is it? What would you like to tell me?" And to listen. Because normally if something unpleasant arises, we tend to want to shut it back down again, and just to allow it, and to, like a friend, just to listen to what it has to say. Sometimes that can help a lot, and also to help us to really understand what is motivating us under the surface of our conscious mind. Fear is fear. I mean, some fear is important. If in the old days, if you met with a tiger, it was better if you felt fear and ran in the opposite direction. So it's a very important part of our survival. Animals also likewise. They feel fear, and that because otherwise we would just walk across the road with all the traffic going in either direction, and we wouldn't last very long. So a natural fear is perfectly, acceptable. But when people have deep levels of constant anxiety, then I think it's time for them to really sit down and look at their mind.
In life, oftentimes when we commit to a spiritual practice, we feel the importance of it, and we feel why we're doing it. And then at the same time, we still have our lives, and we have all the things that we do in our life that are distracting us from it. And at the same time that we're choosing perhaps to be with a friend, to go and serve somewhere, or to, do something else that we enjoy just for the sake of having a good time. How do you recommend weighting this in terms of finding the right formulation where we're giving adequate to our attention to our spiritual practice, and at the same time taking that exhale where we share time with other beings, where we spend time, enjoying our life and having fun? I know you really value fun too in your life, and taking time for that.
Well, I think the only answer is to make your daily life your Dharma practice. Not to make a separation. When I'm living in the ashram, I'm doing my yoga and meditating and doing satsang. That's spiritual practice. And the rest of the time, when I'm with my family and my friends and swimming and eating nice food and having fun, that's worldly activity. If we make that divide, then there's no hope. Because unless you happen to live in an ashram, and even in the ashram you have to work, they're not going to let you just sit and contemplate the divine. They're going to get you out there chopping the carrots.
Sure.
So the point is that we have two things. One is that we have to appreciate that if we bring attention to whatever we're doing, then that is a spiritual practice. Whether it's, sitting and saying our mantras, or whether it's, looking after our children, or doing the cooking, or whatever, working in our everyday life. If we do it with awareness, with mindfulness, then that's a Dharma practice. And secondly, that it's not just, doing satsang. And spiritual practice demands the cultivation of many, many qualities, such as our generosity and patience. When things annoy us, people annoy us, to try to be more patient and to be more loving and kind, and to have more compassion, and just to, use your daily life, whatever is happening, as the opportunity for practice. All of us can do this constantly. We all fall down, but nonetheless we pick ourselves up and try again, But to recognize that every single person you meet is your opportunity for practice.
Sure.
Every single thing we do, if we do it with awareness, is an opportunity for practice. This is practice, this is worldly life. The two come together. Then whatever we do is our practice. Learning how to cultivate the good qualities and slowly uproot the negative, for which we need other people. Because if we're just all by ourselves, or in a nice, happy spiritual environment, then we can imagine we're ever so much nicer than we really are.
Sure.
But it's when we're dealing with the world in general, who could care less about our spiritual practice, that we really understand how much we've actually integrated and how much we still have far to go.
Sure. Absolutely. It feels like we as human beings have started to view ourselves as separate from nature, like we're not a part of it somehow. And it feels like that is part of why humanity has become so comfortable polluting the earth. Why do you think that is, and what can we do to really start to connect with nature and realize our place in the totality of things?
I think one of the problems has been this scientific, materialistic scientific view. Partly it's a view that we are the lords of creation and everything was made for us, and so we can do what we like with it. So that's part of it. That's from the Abrahamic religious point of view. But also from the scientific point of view, the idea that somehow everything is mechanistic, and that, plants and trees and flowers and all these are just, made up of material elements, and that the denial of the intelligence of the universe, and the fact that not just, even animals are not graced with being conscious. They're still debating whether animals have feelings, which is as absurd as anything could possibly be, because anybody, even if they have a pet dog or cat, knows that that is a being there with feelings and thoughts and, joys and sorrows. Anybody knows that. That's why people like having pets, because they feel that, unconditional love of the animal, that the animal will never get bored with them and go off and find somebody else because they're not so beautiful anymore. They know that they can trust the animal to love them once the animal loves them. We all know that. And yet, at the same time, people think that cows and sheep and pigs are just there for us to, kill and exploit and eat, without even the slightest idea that they have feelings like any other being, like we do. We're animals. And then plants also have so much. I read one time somewhere that if you want to if you have a garden with vegetables, that if you want, when it comes time to take the vegetables, you should tell the vegetables ahead of time. That's what you're going to do, so they're prepared. So I thought, okay. So in my case, I had these turnips and potatoes. So I thought, all right. So I sat down and I visualized the turnips I was going to pull up. And I said to the turnips, all right, look, thank you very much for growing here. It's very kind of you. Now it's time that I'm going to have to pull you up. You're going to be my sustenance for my practice. And so I'm very grateful to you, but please accept that right now this is it. So I'm going to come and pull you up. And, I just sort of explained the situation to them as nicely as possibly. And then the advice was to give them 24 hours because they're a little slow. So next day I went to pull up the turnips. And those turnips, which I had spoken to, all just came up. I mean, I was ready for the resistance when you pull a root plant out of the soil. But they just came up.
Wow.
No resistance at all. So then I tried those turnips, which I hadn't talked to, and those, you had to really pull them up and clear the earth around to pull them up. But the ones I'd spoken to, they just came up.
Amazing.
So, I mean, the point is that they have their own intelligence. And all beings have their intelligence. And we're all part of that. And the disconnect is what's been the problem. That we haven't recognized that we're all very profoundly interconnected. And this idea that everything is mechanistic, and even that our consciousness is just our brain, and not recognizing that consciousness is such a vast, interpenetrating entity, totally mysterious. That's why we're destroying ourselves. Plus our greed, of course. Which is, endless. However much we get, we want more. And so our greed and our aggression and our ignorance and our total loss of connection, not only with nature, but now more and more with each other, is a big, big problem. And it's a big, big problem.
Thank you so much for this. We're going to take a little break and we'll come back with round 2.